Hello my friends, it is Sarah, the itty bitty Celtic witch, and today I am joining you to chat a little bit about witchcraft and deity and how you can begin to connect and build a relationship and an understanding of deity in your practice. So I'm going to start off by saying that deity is very, very different and experienced very differently to each individual person. So if some of this doesn't resonate with you, that's entirely okay. And if you are in your research, as you're learning about pagan deities, as you're learning about witchcraft and deities or earthy spirituality and deity, if you find that your perceptions and your perspectives on deity are differing somewhat from what you're coming across or particular opinions, then that's okay too. As I said, people experience deity in a lot of different ways, so it's only natural that we're going to have some opinions that don't necessarily always align. Even if you're working with the same god, you might experience them, same god or goddess, you might be experiencing them and their energy in a different way from someone else. So let spirit be your guide on your journey, let spirit be your primary guide, and listen to your intuition for that guidance, for those messages and signs. So I did create a blog post to accompany this video, so I will be referring to my notes as we go through, and I've linked to the blog post above if you would like to read through this in written form. So I kind of started off by saying that deity is very much, it's a very personalized, unique experience to each individual. So keep that in mind. And again, I'm saying it again, but please let spirit be your guide and listen to that and honor that message. So I'm gonna start by talking about a few different ways that you can connect with deity and the divine in paganism, in green witchcraft, in general, in earthy spirituality, or whatever sort of spiritual word and system resonates with you. And it's totally okay if you resonate with some of these aspects of divinity, of the divine, of deity, and not others, or maybe it's a combination, or maybe it's all of the above. So let's just dive right in, shall we? So the first one I'm going to talk about is the divine in nature and creatures. So one of the main ways that a lot of pagans, a lot of witches experience and connect with deity, connect with the divine, is through their relationship with nature. And one of the ways that you can explore this magic, this divinity, this spiritual essence, whatever sort of word resonates with you, one of the ways that you can begin to explore this in terms of nature, in terms of the creatures outdoors, is to begin by taking a look at the Wheel of the Year. The Wheel of the Year is part of many different pagan practices. Not everybody follows the Wheel of the Year, but if you're starting out or looking at a way to reconnect with nature, then the Wheel of the Year can provide a really, really good structure to begin exploring it, because essentially the Wheel of the Year, there's 8 Sabbats, and they follow the natural cycles of the earth. So Imbolc, we have the very first signs of spring, depending on where you live. Again, Austera, which we just moved through, that spring equinox, engaging with that springtime seasonal energy. And then moving throughout the Wheel of the Year, by bringing mindfulness to the Sabbats and to their celebrations, it can reconnect you and reroute you with the Earth's natural cycles and offer an opportunity to celebrate and explore that in a spiritual way and honor that sort of divine, magical energy that is surrounding us in nature. So the Wheel of the Year is a really good starting place, and a good place no matter where you are in your path. I've been practicing witchcraft for several years now, and I follow the Wheel of the Year regularly as the season sort of flows. as a way to reconnect and re-engage with the natural cycles around us. It's a really good opportunity to sort of take a step outside of the daily sort of activities, hustle and bustle, and breathe and just reconnect with nature and explore that connection. So the Wheel of the Year, really good spot and really good way to build a relationship with the divinity in nature. However, it isn't the only way to experience nature. You can simply experience nature by going outside, and that is absolutely one of the best ways to come to an understanding of if nature feels divine to you, if there is that magic there for you, is by simply being outside in it. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go on long walks or long hikes through the forest. For a lot of for a lot of us, that simply isn't possible, right? A lot of people live in cities. I live in a city. So one of the ways that I find is really accessible for me to connect with nature is to go outside on my balcony, or if you have a backyard, go in your backyard, going for walks through the city, whether it's a city park or a city street. Nature is all around you. That fresh air is there to connect with and to bring awareness to while you are reflecting on sort of your relationship and your own understandings with spirit and that divine nature energy. So along with this, some simple ways, I guess, to summarize connecting with divine nature is to explore the Wheel of the Year, is to head outside, and while you're outside, bring awareness. So being very, very mindful of the energy that is surrounding you. Learning about your local plants and animals. So this is really going to be something that differs depending on where you are, but engaging with the nature around you by expanding your knowledge about the nature that is around you, what trees, what plants, what birds, what insects, what animals surround you. Learning about them and their patterns is a really good way to strengthen a connection with that magical energy. And then another one is to engage with them in a magical way as well. So perhaps after you have gone for a walk in a local park or in the forest, depending on where you live, then you can always leave a sort of blessing behind, a thank you to nature, acknowledging that you are aware of its spiritual connection with you. And a really good way to do that is to simply draw a magical symbol that resonates with you. Maybe it's a triquetra, a triskel, a pentacle. Simply to draw that in the dirt and leave that there as a blessing on the space. So the next aspect I am going to look at for deity and paganism and witchcraft is the concept of deity as a single being. So in my blog post I wrote, is deity as a single being God? It could be. It really depends on your path, right? You could experience deity as a single being, but who also belongs to a pantheon of gods. So for instance, as I grab a sip of water, as perhaps you're working with a Norse pantheon, then connecting with one of those gods or goddesses could be sort of the main primary way that you engage with deity. And in that sense, it is sort of a single being because you are just building a relationship with one deity. But looking outside of that as well, deity can also be perceived as sort of an expression of all of the different types of gods. So perhaps in your practice, an idea of god or goddess or divine is all of those different pantheons of gods and goddesses. Perhaps that plays into a sort of single entity in your practice. In my own practice, I look at deity as a pantheon. I don't sort of connect with it as a single being. But if that is something that you want to explore, that's definitely an option out there. And it's not just Christians and some of the more centralized religions that view deity as a single god. You'll find many different people on the witchcraft pagan communities experiencing the divine as a sort of being that is expressed in a multitude of different ways, whether it's through nature or through a multitude of different deities. It's really very much an understanding that is based on your own sort of spiritual guide. And as I mentioned, that's not something that works for my path, but that doesn't mean it couldn't work for yours. And the best way to really understand if you resonate with deity as a single being is to spend some time reflecting on it, to meditating on it, to thinking about it, and to opening your spirit and mind up to that sort of possibility, and then feeling out whether it's actually a good fit for you or whether there's some other messages coming through. So as I mentioned, I connect with deity more as a pantheon, and this is something that is also really sort of prevalent in pagan, in witchcraft communities, is a connection to pagan pantheon. So what is a pagan pantheon of deities? What is it that I am talking about? So the idea of a pagan pantheon or a pagan deity, if we go back a little bit in time, pagan was sort of the term that Christianity used as it was spreading along its widespread path to differentiate sort of between us and them. So as Christianity spread, any sort of pagan deities that were encountered, or worship of pagan deities as sort of the present culture, when that was encountered by Christianity's expansion, then those deities were generally referred to as pagan. So if we think about pagan pantheons, they are really just simply a pantheon of deities, and you could choose to refer to them as pagan pantheons, or simply a pantheon, or simply a deity, but essentially that's what it is. A pagan pantheon refers to a group of deities that are sort of separate from Christianity, and as I mentioned, oftentimes it was simply the addition of pagan to the names of the deities was simply a way for Christianity to identify sort of the difference between the god they were worshiping and the gods or goddesses that others were worshiping that they encountered as they moved along their path. So that is essentially what a pagan pantheon is, and there's a wide range of pagan pantheons, of deities, and oftentimes they are very connected to locality, to a local geographical area. For instance, I work with a Celtic pantheon of deities. So those would be deities who originate or were traditionally worshipped by the Celts, by the Irish, by the Welsh, and the different areas that the Celts expanded to, because they did have a more widespread area than the British Isles. Then there's also deity or pantheons like Norse, Roman, Greek, Egyptian, and that is by no means a comprehensive list. There are so many different pagan pantheons out there, and if you are interested in learning about the deities from a particular area, then go for it. Explore that energy and learn about that energy to get a better understanding of it. So those ones are simply, as I mentioned, not an exhaustive list. They're just the ones that I am most familiar with. So how to begin then working with pagan deities? So the first things first, you're going to want to start with some research. You're going to want to learn about these deities. Deities are very, very unique. They each have different attributes. They have different aspects which they look over, which they lend their guidance to. They have different correspondences. So correspondences being perhaps colors or plant and animal allies that are associated with them. There's a lot of variation between deities, so really your best direction if you're feeling called to learn about or work with a particular pantheon, particular deities, is to begin by learning. And a good starting point for this is online. There's a lot of information out there about specific deities in articles and blog posts, in history writings. The main thing that you're going to want to be very aware of as you are exploring these deities' energies is that sort of the don't believe everything you read or see or watch or hear kind of deal. Use your intuition as a guide and feel things out. Some things will be really well researched, really well thought out, have really great sort of backgrounds as best can be, considering that in some cases like the Celtic Pantheon, that there isn't necessarily as much historical written information on it. But just be mindful as you are sort of researching and learning that to keep an open eye as to what it is that you're consuming. If something feels like it doesn't fit, then do some further research, find out if that is just one person's perspective on the deity, and perhaps that's like a really, really strong connection for them, and that's amazing for them. But if it's not working for you and you find that you're sort of connected to some different aspects of the deity, then just continue on researching, continue on learning. So from the web, some places that you might branch off to: written articles, books, and then there's also sort of the library as a great resource, speaking of books. So if you're researching on a budget and you want to sort of get your hands on some mythological texts or historical books or whatever it is that you are sort of researching, a library is a really great sort of resource for finding out information and learning information while you are sort of on a budget. And then another thing to be very mindful of as a way to learn about deities is blogs. So here you're going to get a lot of different persons' experiences, individual experiences with deities, and this can be a good idea to understand how others are engaging with the deity, that sense of community. But again, if there's bits and pieces that aren't quite fitting with your own perceptions, then trust in spirit. Let spirit be your guide. Deities can work with individuals in different ways. So just something to keep in mind while you're researching. From there, you're going to want to do some more meditation and reflection. So this doesn't necessarily have to mean sort of sitting at an altar, but taking the time to sort of think about things and think about whether this deity is really pulling you, and just reflecting and pondering on that can be a really great way to understand if a deity is calling and speaking to you. And it is time for a sip of water, I do believe. Alright, so the next bit is pay attention to the signs that are around you. So oftentimes, or at least I had a pause there, or at least in my own practices, in my own experiences, when a deity is calling to you, then sometimes you will just get repetitive signs, repetitive patterns coming up and again. Perhaps it's animal allies sort of appearing to you again and again. In my own practice, for an example, it is crows. They're just everywhere. Crows follow me a lot. And from there, I was able to sort of explore crows and their connection to deity. Perhaps it's another bird or another animal. Learning about these animals, about these creature allies, these plant allies that are appearing again and again to you can be a really important sign as to whether a deity is speaking to you and calling to you. Another thing could also be just sort of that repetitive, repeated thought of this deity coming into mind again and again. Like you're doing something totally else. You're reading a book, you're watching Netflix, and the deity comes to mind again and again and again. Again, paying mind and paying attention to patterns and watching those patterns as guidance and as insight. And then after you spend some time learning, reflecting, sort of being mindful of the patterns around you, then you can sort of begin to honor and work with them. And this is very much going to be unique to the deity, how you work with them. And you're going to sort of build an understanding of the best way to approach a particular deity and to work with them through your research. So that's going to provide a really good foundation, giving you insight into correspondences, things that they like as offerings, for instance, or energy, and whether their energy is a good fit with your energy, and whether the aspects they watch over are sort of the aspects you are very strongly passionate about. So when it comes to honoring deities, simply keep in mind your research as a guide, and also your intuition and your own connection with deity, whether it's through meditation or those patterns, and then using those as a guide to begin working with them. And as a general rule, whenever you're working with deity, a thank you never goes amiss. So if you're invoking them in a spell, or you're calling on their guidance, then a thank you goes a long way, whether that's in the form of an offering or sort of a spoken thank you, again, depending on the deity and sort of your understanding of their unique aspects as your guide for how to go about sending out that thank you. So that is a guide on how to begin connecting with deity and how to explore that relationship with the divine and deity in your path. I would absolutely love to hear sort of what your approach is to connecting with a deity and to exploring that relationship with deity and the divine. And that is all for me. And until next time, I wish you so very many blessings. And as well, if you would like to have your say on the next witchcraft resources video I make for April, then pop over to my Patreon account. The link is below, and you'll have the opportunity to vote and have your say on which topic I choose for April. So again, so very many blessings, and wishing you a very lovely day.